Opinions discussed on Canadian Love by our guests are not representative of the crew or host. Facts may be referenced that we cannot back up, so please don't listen to everything you hear on the internet. Resources mentioned in the video will be listed in the description below. Please do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Thank you.
Today on Canadian Love, we will be interviewing Shane, a member of the Extinction Rebellion with passionate views about biodiversity, ecology, and our environment. After all, Canada's natural resources are a part of what makes us who we are. And I'd say that deserves some, you know, Canadian love. Alright guys, so here with me today is Shane, who, Shane, we're really excited to have you now. You're wearing a shirt that really says what you are to me. When I met Shane, he was at an event with signs about protecting biodiversity and stuff, which is part of the reason why we're doing this episode in this beautiful yard-like area.
Nice.
Yeah. Shane, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So, welcome to Canadian Love. We're going to talk a bit about your views, and then we're going to delve in and try to understand them, and then we're going to go back to those views again. So, when I met you at the Ford rally, your signs were about biodiversity and something about
the Extinction Rebellion was the sign I was entertaining at that event. Yeah.
Can we start by tell us more about the Extinction Rebellion?
Oh boy. Okay. It's a big story.
Yeah.
In a small part of the world, which is how I think stories happen now, in a sense.
That's fair.
But the Extinction Rebellion is a movement that has emerged out of England, based on or emerging from a group called Rise Up, and a few of the key people in that decided that they really wanted to push for some genuine action on climate change in particular, but also the biodiversity crisis.
Right.
And they've come up with this program, Extinction Rebellion, and it had a few initial events in England and 100 versions of what's called the talk. Which is basically it's a discussion titled the coming extinction crisis and what we can do about it.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a pretty heavy talk. There's a lot of data on the state of the environment, the state of biodiversity, and a real encouragement towards civic engagement through nonviolent direct action. And this nonviolent direct action culminated in April 15th. On April 15th, in an occupation of a number of sites in London, England.
Oh wow! Okay.
And that occupation lasted for I think 6 and 7 days in its last form. And the final form, I mean, it was beautiful. There was, sit-ins and lots of music, lots of speakers. They had kitchens and they occupied squares and bridges and lived there for a week.
For a week.
And shut down these parts of London, all around the core of London. It resulted in near 1,100 arrests. And
so you're making someone angry.
Exactly. Well, this is how one of the guys is who's in charge of it, or who's led it. Let's say, I don't want to say anyone's in charge because I think they decry that. But his name is Roger Hallam, and he's done some really interesting videos and talks on. They're available on YouTube, of course.
Yeah. So YouTube. Roger Hallam. How do we spell that, just in case someone wants to search it?
Hallam.
Okay, Roger, Hallam. Perfect. Continue.
And one of the points he makes, he's researching a doctorate at, I think it's University College London.
Okay, yeah.
On civil disobedience and direct action. And one of his calculations, if you like, or one of the data sets he's looking at is, well, how many people do you need to get arrested to get a good meeting?
Okay.
So he's been involved with actions around employment at the university. There was a cleaners group that was really suffering poor employment standards. So he went in and with a group of dedicated people, they did some nonviolent actions. They got arrested. They within 8 days, I believe, had changed the policy of the university.
Wow.
Toward these cleaners.
Wow.
And he says, okay, so what's it going to take to get a national government to act on climate change?
Yeah.
And I don't know that he predicted 1,000, but it seemed a pretty reasonable,
1,000
round
arrests?
number.
Yeah,
a nice round number. Yeah, and shortly after the week-long action was closed, and I guess within part of that, there was commitments from a number of upper-level politicians in England to meet with representatives of the Extinction Rebellion, and this included Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary,
okay, nice,
and the Mayor of London, and I believe the Chief of Police, who was really denouncing them throughout their action, but you know, he just arrested 1,000 people, so
that
they got
weighs
some
on you.
attention. And it's interesting because you look like, I mean, sorry, just looking at your reaction, I'm not sure you've heard much about this at all.
I haven't, no.
And I've been immersed in it because there's so much on it. There's so much action and twittering and news items that don't reach you and don't reach so many people because, you know, that's where my eyes are set. And I think, you know, coming to the big theme that you've described to me around our discussion tonight, this I think is key to it, is that I can see more than I can even take in a very narrow lens. So this is why I'm saying it's a big story, but in a kind of a narrow perspective. And I don't like to think I've got a narrow perspective, but on this I'm sure I've got a focus that a lot of people don't.
I mean, you know, even with your basic camera, you want a wide lens where you're seeing a little bit of everything, or do you want to zone in, focus on one thing, but then that's all you're seeing? So that makes sense.
It depends on the shot you want.
Depends on, what shot you want. Exactly, yeah.
Right?
Okay, so you've really been doing a close-up on the Extinction Rebellion recently.
I have, and I think it's important that it's grown to be represented globally. I say globally in quotation marks, definitely. Its primary home is England, but there's a lot of activity, a lot of connections with the Fridays for Future movement.
Okay.
And this was instigated by a Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
That's her name, and yeah. So she's I want to say a young lady. She just turned 16. I don't know where the line is, but
young lady,
she's fabulous. She speaks so eloquently and meaningfully about the inactivity of governments and the urgency that she sees, that her generation sees, to get them to act.
Yeah.
And so the messaging is very, very congruent with what the Extinction Rebellion is talking about, which, if I may, just briefly, because this is really, I think, you know, they're summed up in their 3 demands. And the first demand is tell the truth. And I said this at the rally the other day, and I mean, it's really important, I think, to look honestly at the evidence and to be willing to discuss it, to be willing to present it, not to hide it, not to run away from it. This is real. It's in front of us, and this is here now.
Yeah.
We
Animals are dying, plants are dying, ecosystems are not
ice
doing
caps
well.
are melting, glaciers are melting, floods and droughts and tidal waves. Not tidal waves. Sorry, that's silly. Water is water and drought, and they're just like the news reels that focus again on those things are horrific. They're so scary.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and there's a lot of environmental refugees whose little bits of land have been completely flooded, are now underwater.
I think
in different parts of the world.
I think the government of India was looking to move some 4 million people out of the path of a typhoon.
Wow.
This week. The typhoon was expected to hit the living area of about 100 million people.
Wow.
It's the biggest, I think, in the Indian Ocean, possibly on record.
Wow.
At this in April. In April was the thing. So
now, Shane, I want to do a brief aside here, just because, you know, we have a variety of people who watch the show.
I'm running up a lot of time on Extinction Rebellion.
Oh, no, that's fine. This is, you know, we care about what you're passionate about. That's what Canadian Love is always caring about. So and you're passionate about this. We love it. But I want, just for the people who may watch this, who don't believe in climate change, or believe that climate change is a natural part of the Earth's, you know, wobble. Can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, glaciers are melting, and it's caused by humans, yes?
That's certainly what I've come to believe from what I've studied and read, which I'd like to say is very well supported
Yeah.
by the science that I've seen and my understanding of the scientific community. And
I mean, I guess it's just yes, the Earth's temperature fluctuates, but the speed at which it's fluctuating just wouldn't make sense without human involvement.
There's actually some very good chemistry and physics behind the very idea of the greenhouse effect, and it's not a new idea. We've known about this for 100 years, and it's about the energy levels in the CO2 molecules, and how they're capturing this reflected energy, the infrared, and holding it and getting excited in the atmosphere, rather than that. So because there's more CO2, that radiant heat is just not leaving the envelope of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so it's being held within. Sorry, I can't describe this chemistry very well, and I apologize for this. I did read through a really interesting book called A Farewell to Ice by a fellow named Peter Wadhams. He's
nice title.
Yeah, he was the director of the Scott Polar Research Institute at the University of Cambridge in England. You know, pretty high level research credentials. And his book was very interesting and goes through this in some detail. But I mean, because I don't have a particularly acute scientific mind, and I'll happily confess that. You know, it's it was what it was. In the days, I did do a Bachelor of Science, but then I moved into political science. But we'll talk about that in time.
Okay, I'm already intrigued.
Yeah. Sorry. So.
Yeah. So. Extinction Rebellion is about climate change, is also about, biodiversity loss from, I assume, development and industrial practices and agriculture encroaching on habitat, and all of these things sort of blended together to be losing biodiversity. And I guess the urgency is coming from the fact that both climate change and an extinction of a species are pretty impossible to reverse.
I think that's very fair to say. I mean, obviously, an extinction of a species, extinction's forever.
Yeah, extinction,
change.
Literally.
It's literally
that's it.
That's it. That's
it's over.
And I mean, I can't bear to hear myself chuckle. That's just the cameras. Forgive me, but there are. I was actually reading this morning about the debate around extinction rates and claims. There are claims out there that the rate of extinction is between 1,000 and 10,000 times the normal background rate at which species disappear from this planet.
Wow.
Over the last million or 10 million or 100 million years.
Yeah.
Okay, so extinction events have occurred a number of times. I think there are 5 principal extinction events.
Yeah.
4 of them. Sorry, one of them was caused by an asteroid.
That's the dinosaurs, right?
About 65 million years ago.
Yep, we've heard
and the other 4 apparently were caused by climate alterations, deviating relatively rapidly from a norm.
Yeah.
250 million years ago, I think it was the Permian extinction, or the end of the Permian extinction, wiped out something like 90% of the creatures on the planet.
Wow.
Effectively because of climate change.
Right.
And so part of what extinction, I guess primarily what Extinction Rebellion is looking at is, yes, we're in the midst of the 6th mass extinction, which is largely caused by the activities of human. It's partly it's hunting, right? But a lot of it is habitat loss, and a lot of it is pollutions. And there's all kinds of pollutions. You know, the plastics, the pesticides.
Oh. Even the fertilizers.
And the dead zones that those are causing in the oceans, etc. So I presume you've heard about like insect declines of late. There've been a number of studies in the last year.
No, I mean I've heard a bit about bees declining. I got into beebeekeeping because of it. But
nice.
Tell me more about these insect declines.
A couple of studies that I've seen published in the last year or so. The most recent was from Germany, and if I'm recalling it correctly, it's 75% of insect biomass, a 75% decline since 1980s.
Wow.
In test sites in Germany. So they're collecting bugs, and you know, in an area, and the populations are down to a quarter of what they were when I was a teenager, and this is dreadful. But it's, you know, it has so much to do with agricultural practices, and with development, right? We drain swamps, we you know,
literally drain the
pave
swamp.
over paradise, and there we go. We've got our parking lots, but that's all we've got. And so here we are, mass extinction, climate change is ongoing, and clearly, to some minds, hitting some tipping points with the Arctic melting and the albedo effect.
Yeah. For those who don't understand the albedo effect, the problem with ice melting in the Arctic is that ice is white, and white reflects a lot of light and heat. So not only does the Arctic ice, you know, hold a lot of the water, it also reflects a lot of the heat back because it's white. And as it melts, it creates more water over what was ice, and water is typically dark when it's really deep. So then it absorbs even more heat. So that's why there's a tipping point, is that as the ice gradually melts more and more, you get more and more dark water absorbing heat, and it speeds up the process. So it's potentially quite dangerous.
Potentially. Yeah. I would grant you potentially, at least.
Okay. Potentially, at least.
Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, not to assume too much, I guess, about this being the only way to see things, but there's really no guarantee that human beings are not as susceptible as many other creatures to being part of the sixth mass extinction. And we look at this in terms of, you know, you could think about the bees. I think it was Albert Einstein said that there's basically 3 years. If the bees are gone, human beings will be gone in 3 years.
Wow.
And I'm not sure that that's appropriately credited. I'm sorry, it's one of those memes I've come across.
Probably Einstein.
It might have been Einstein, or it might have been some other smart person, but you know, bees are responsible for pollinating an awful lot of our food crops. Are you do you want to get out of the sun?
Can we just take a quick break and someone move that over just slightly that way?
Could you remind me the question that led us into the Arctic mention?
We were talking about the albedo, we were talking about the urgency of climate change and biodiversity, and you mentioned wanting to talk more about the Arctic.
Right. I would like to talk more about the Arctic because I think it's a key to the potential rapid advancement or acceleration of climate change. And again, coming back to this idea that there's nothing guaranteeing that we're not going to be part of what goes extinct here. We are susceptible, you know, we have physiologies that can only handle certain things. We have agricultural systems that can only function in certain
100%,
reliability spectrums, right? So when we come back to the Arctic, the albedo is absolutely a key factor in what's going on up there as the ice disappears and the snow cover darkens. And part of this is as it melts. You know, in spring, as the snow mounds melt, you find that they get darker and darker because there's more dirt in them. Yeah. And there's, you know, there's loads of accumulations of various emissions and dust and garbage and you know, things in the snow that are being exposed as the snow disappears. So this is happening in glaciers. There's an interesting aside, is that a lot of the climbers of Mount Everest who've died over the years and been left up there because that's where they're buried.
Where are you going to get
them? Now being exposed.
Wow.
There's also concerns.
Because they were frozen in glaciers.
Yeah.
They were buried under a pile of rocks in a glacier, and the glacier...
under the snow on Everest and becoming part of the glacier, but the glaciation has reversed, and now they're becoming open to the elements, let's say. Yeah.
Climate change.
Really, lots is changing, eh? But, okay, so coming back, there is the albedo. There's also the latent heat of ice. There's the fact that it takes a tremendous amount of heat energy to turn ice into water.
Yeah.
And then when it's water, it heats up at a much more gradual rate. And I believe the ratio is 80. So it takes something like 80 kilojoules to change 1 gram of ice to 1 gram of water.
Yeah.
Then you've got 1 gram of water, and if you add another 80 kilojoules, you raise the temperature of it by 80 degrees centigrade.
Okay, so as soon as the ice has become water, poof, things are going to
Exactly.
skyrocket
So that's a really important transition that we don't think about maybe necessarily when we say, okay, well, we've lost 5% of the ice, but we've lost a huge amount of the heat as well, or we've absorbed a huge amount of the heat. Sorry, and a lot of this heat is going into the oceans. I mean, there's something like 90 or 93% of the heat that has been captured in the global warming process is in the oceans. It's not changed the atmosphere that much.
We haven't seen it out here.
Well, no, exactly. I mean, like right now, the estimates are we're 1.2 maybe degrees on average globally above the baseline, and I think that's the 1800 or something, 1850 to 1980 baseline, and of course you could go back pre-industrial and it's a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Back to the Arctic ice. What's happening in the Arctic? As that ice melts, you get more wave action because the sea isn't covered by the ice.
Yeah.
And that wave action is then detrimental to the stability of the remaining ice pack.
Huh. Yeah. So it's just it could be like a spiral into.
Do you want me to go on?
You're
not sure.
I'm already kind of nervous, but
well, you should be.
Yeah.
You should be. This is like things are really changing in ways that we cannot, at this point, to my mind, control.
Yeah.
And I mean, this comes back to your point that extinction, yes, is forever, and this climate change thing, frankly, looks really quite irreversible. And that's a difficult thing, I think, to find openings to discuss.
Right.
In a lot of
Hey, how's it going? Climate change is irreversible, and we're doing nothing about it. How would you like your death?
You know what? It's been pretty obvious, I think, for a couple of decades to some observers that what's happening is not going to be reversed in this societal spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think part of what Extinction Rebellion is based on is the idea that we got to change society, rapidly and.
So there are sources that some of my conservative friends are very on board with, that are saying that climate change is not real, or is not man-caused, or at least that human causes are only a small part of it, and it's not really something that's our fault or that we should be worried about. Which interests are these? Is this oil and gas companies that are putting this out, or are there still scientists that aren't being paid off by large oil and gas companies who still don't believe climate? Like, where is this coming from? This environmental backlash, as they sometimes call it.
Where is it coming from? I don't know precisely. It's not coming from the majority of scientists. It is certainly a minority opinion in the scientific community.
Yeah.
Where those scientists are funded from, yes, well, I've heard rumors, but I'm not prepared to pinpoint or even accuse them of, taking money from the wrong side. I mean, I think in just about any issue you can get an appeal to what's sometimes called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And there's I'm going to say a fairly effective way to counter factual arguments. You make them emotional, and you sow uncertainty and doubt using experts, and I'll put that in quotes. I mean, I think it happens on all sides. I'm sure it happens on the Extinction Rebellion, climate emergency, climate panic side. I mean, I'm more familiar with that side, I suppose, and I could point to certain celebrity opinions that say, like, near-term human extinction is bound to happen within the next 5 years because of this, and this.
Yeah. And you're like, well, I think we have more than 5 years as a species. I hope so. I'd like my child to reach the age of 20.
Perhaps. I mean, I think there's an awful lot of species, though, that have suffered tremendous declines, and remnant populations have survived because the conditions are available to enable them to survive, but the majority are gone.
And meanwhile, who's going to be the remnant population of humanity? The super rich. The people who own Exxon. No?
I don't think so.
You don't think? I think so, because they'll have the money to have their own little private you know, islands
There's this
on
fella.
stilts
This fella.
above the
I think his
floods.
name's Douglas Rushkoff.
Okay.
He's a bit of a futurist, and he's actually put out a blog report, if you like, an article that talks about he was invited to meet with some very ultra rich, super rich, mega rich, whatever.
Yeah.
Who sat him down and said, "So how the hell are we going to protect ourselves going forward?" And one of the ensuing points of discussion that I got out of this article he wrote was that these people are really worried that their guards are going to turn on them when the going gets tough. I mean, how do they protect themselves from their personal private army, security forces, what have you? What incentive have they got? What can they offer people when the world is falling apart around them and you're stuck on this island and you've got this guy and he thinks he's the boss and you got the gun? You know, the scenario is pretty grim, and
it is funny to me that they're like, you know, we're really worried, like, when everyone else is starving to death and the world is falling apart, but we're still living in mansions with guards and soufflés being served, how are we going to stop the guards from turning on us and taking our soufflés and our pâté? Like, maybe that's unfair to the rich. If anyone is watching this and is rich and is offended by that, please come on our show and correct me.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
it is kind of funny to me that they're like, yeah, we're really worried about our guards turning on us when the world falls apart.
I think that
and
there's lots of things to worry about, but I mean, there's lots of uncertainties in any future scenario, right?
Very fair.
But
yes.
if these are people who, you know, to his mind, were not really counting on the current structure of economy and civilization to maintain for the duration of their lifetimes.
Yeah.
And so they were trying to make plans, and really this is bunker mentality in one sense, but maybe they wanted to go beyond bunker mentality and think about continuities. You know, how can we sustain what it is we've got that we love? And who doesn't want to do that? This is the whole sustainable development argument,
yeah.
I think, is how do we keep the good stuff? And
Yeah.
I'm moving into another discourse now that's come under the notion of deep adaptation.
Deep adaptation.
Interesting scholar from England wrote a paper. His name's Jem Bendell, Bendell.
Okay, yeah.
It's Jem, Jem.
Jem Bendell.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
We'll put it in the description.
yeah, we'll link to all these, I'm sure.
I hope
maybe.
so. We'll see.
So he's developing an idea around what he calls deep adaptation,
Yeah.
and this is an acceptance that some form of collapse of civilization is very likely, and we need to really think hard about how we're going to adapt ourselves to and our systems and our society to navigate this. And so sorry, to come back to he talks about resilience being this question of, well, what is it that we've got that we want to maintain? And then he talks about relinquishment, which is what have we got that we can get rid of and maybe need to get rid of in order to maintain those things that we really want.
Yeah.
So you can think about, you know, like this is a question that comes up with the fossil fuel economy, for instance. Do we need to get rid of it, or do we love it? I mean, and this is the value question that we have to, that's a discussion we have to have.
How much do we love our cars? And if the extinction of a variety of species, a bunch of natural disasters, and, you know, and the other horrors of climate change are the price, then how much do we really love our cars? Can we relinquish our car culture? Can we relinquish plastics, which are also made with fossil fuels? This is sort of the question that's being asked, right?
Yeah. And this third R is, I believe it's restoration or restitution, is what can we recover? What can we bring back? You know, extinction, no, we can't bring that back. But forests, yes, we can.
We can bring back forests.
Some of them. Not to what they were, not for a long time, because we've destroyed forests that were, you know, thousands of years old,
Yeah.
to build houses and boats. And what do we put back? We don't put back forests, we put back trees. and imagine that those are going to be forests. But they don't have the biodiversity. They don't have the interconnectedness. You know, I mean, trees are communities too. Forests are communities of many, many creatures.
Yeah.
And, you know, so we put up trees and they capture carbon, and that's, you know, that keeps some people happy, some accountants, but it doesn't restore ecology very well. So anyway, Bendel's paper is really interesting. I'd encourage, I'd like to encourage anybody to read it.
Yeah.
But I want to come back if we could, because I think you want to maybe find me answering this question and addressing this question is, well, what do I say to your conservative friends, and how about my conservative friends? Because I grew up in small town Ontario, and I've got some conservative friends out there.
Yeah.
Some of whom have shut me off on Facebook, which is understandable completely, because it's a difficult discourse to have. Because I'm pretty certain about what I've read, and when I hear that other people have read things differently or read different things and believe different things, I find it challenging to know how to respond without just throwing more information at them. Well, I've got 25 studies to your 5, so, you know, and I've got 90% of scientists, and you've only got 10, and yeah, okay, they've got some interesting arguments, and, you know,
Sure.
who funds the science? What's the political agenda?
Yeah.
You know, you can go very deep. So, I find this is where something like Bendel's thinking is really interesting, because it's not so much what's causing it, but I think it's got to be very difficult to look at the world today and say it's not changing. I mean, if I understood and have understood the challenge to maybe more conservative thought is a certain allegiance to a way of life that has been developed over the last 250 odd years. I mean, industrial civilization being a pretty favorable condition for certain aspects of human life.
Okay, sure.
Like the numeracy of it. You know, there's 7.5 billion people on the earth. This is like an exponential growth since 1700.
Yeah.
Due to improvements in hygiene and healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also in food production and in the availability of you know, protection from the elements. You know.
Yeah. Better housing, better food, just better technology in general. Better medicine.
And we've really got very good at fending off death. You know, part of it's pharmaceuticals. A lot of those are very dependent on fossil fuel bases. Think about electrical, you know, the wiring protection that's enabled by plastics.
Yeah.
Okay. You know,
let alone electricity itself, which is a massive industry.
Yeah. Like I mean, houses don't burn down like they used to, right?
Houses don't burn down like they used to. Sorry, continue.
The things that used to kill human beings, we've made tremendous progress in stopping them from killing human beings. And some people think this is the most wonderful thing that could be.
Yeah.
And other people see 7.5 billion human beings consuming and you know, producing waste and consuming land and resources and the space that other creatures need to survive, and see a problem. And I will readily admit I'm in the second part of that. I don't think a population of 7.5 billion is even remotely sustainable for a long period. But I don't think we're not in a period of sustainability, and maybe that isn't even a possibility. I mean, nature doesn't really like its steady states. It moves. It's always moving.
Nature
it's
always fluctuates. I agree with that. Yeah.
And so if you look at, you know, a graph of human population that just shows you this rapid exponential growth, natural systems tend to follow a period of exponential growth by a heavy crash.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine what else. The wildlife around here is great.
Wildlife.
I don't know how else you could expect the future is going to be. And this is what mystifies me about conservative thinking, is because I get this impression that people think we can carry on just like this. I mean, and I read about what's happening in the oceans to, you know, the ocean populations, the fisheries, the mammals. The But the phytoplankton are in rapid decline. They are responsible for making half of the oxygen on the planet.
Yeah.
And they're dying off. And well, maybe it's because of the acidification, and maybe it's because of the dead zones that we're creating. And maybe it's other things, you know? I mean, it might even be natural systems. I mean, maybe there's sun flares. Okay, well, if there are, we still got problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess the other side of it is that I've always entertained a certain responsibility for the well-being of nature. I mean, I love the natural world. I adore creatures. I'm in tears to read about extinctions.
Yeah.
I mean, it really moves me. And yeah, you know, I don't get out camping enough, but I really like to be out enjoying the natural world.
Yeah.
And of late, I've been really lamenting the losses of things like insects. I mean, do you know what fireflies look like? Do you know what a field full of fireflies looks like?
I mean, yes, but only because I went through a phase in my life where I did a lot of camping in different places. And I once saw that, and it was amazing.
My children don't, because I can't find one for them.
Yeah. That's pretty heartbreaking.
I don't know. It's just when I grew up, the fields, the meadows were full of fireflies, and it was just like a normal thing. You would go out and there they'd be pop, 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 pop. And I don't see them anymore. And I don't know, like that wounds me deeply.
Yeah.
And I really just feel compelled to speak about this, to, you know, and I'm challenged to find platforms. So when this Extinction Rebellion came up, I just found it very, very meaningful and a very powerful set of messages that they had. And I didn't finish my 3 points. I want to apologize for that. I don't know. Can you give me a minute on that? You want to move on?
Well, I think we're gonna take a break shortly and then start again. So we will have time for the rest of those 3 points. I want to say one more thing before we take a quick break. First of all, I totally feel that. You know, I would like my grandchildren to also know what spring peepers sound like and what fireflies look like in a field. And that might not be a thing. And that's pretty heartbreaking. So I totally feel that. And I definitely, you know, earlier today we were talking about how people are talking about depression and anxiety more. And, you know, and it's helping people who have that. So I don't know, this thing with Extinction Rebellion, it sounds like there are many people on this planet who are going, man, like, we've got some problems here. I haven't seen any fireflies in a long time. And then they see other people talking about it like Extinction Rebellion, and they go, okay, I'm not the only one. Maybe we can change things. So that's very hopeful. I also, I think, I don't know if we'll pull it around in time, but I know that, for example, with alcohol, you know, when I was a kid, didn't drink. Was not a kid that drank, you know? I can say that much for my parents. No, I love my parents. They're wonderful. You know, and then I hit my teens, and like my late teens, my early 20s, and university, and I drank a lot. We would party. We had some great times. I vomited many times, you know, I'm sorry to say. And, you know, as part of this learning curve. Yeah, you're not alone, Michael. And then, you know, and then I got to a certain part of my life where I was like, okay, this was a really fun thing. But I'm seeing it have adverse effects, like, you know, these days for the next 3 days, I'm going to be having a rough time, not just for the next morning. Yeah. And I sort of started to go, okay, you know what, like, I might need to make some changes here. And if I didn't make those changes, I would currently be an alcoholic and probably have a lot more problems in my life. But I did make those changes, so I went from not drinking at all to drinking way too much to, okay, I like to drink now, but I drink a lot less. I drink in moderation. I don't drink alone as much. You know, it's much better. So I have this hope that, you know, in humanity as a species, in our infancy, in our early childhood, we were fighting against nature to get what we needed. And then industrialism hit, And it was like my 20s, it was like, woo, this stuff is great. Factory, factory, factory. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Fossil fuels, you know, and that was our early 20s.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping that we can collectively turn that around, not become industrial holics and kill ourselves and everything else on the planet, and pull ourselves back to a level where it's like, okay, we still have some factories, we still have some amenities, we're still progressing medical science, but we're no longer doing this anymore, and we're no longer, like, I don't know, I really hope that humanity, like, I feel like humanity is at this point now where we can either swoop up and mature and make things a lot better, or we can not and just continue on this path towards industrialism, is what I'm going to call it. Because that's my alcoholism metaphor. Yeah, I made that word up just now. I don't know if it makes sense. But yeah, so let's take a quick break here, refill our water, and then dive back in. All right.